Diabetes Connections is brought to you by the only ultra-rapid-acting inhaled insulin and by Dexcom, keeping you in control with an integrated system for diabetes management.
This is Diabetes Connections with Stacey Sims.
This week, you'll probably know him as Type 1 Talks with a popular YouTube channel and videos that help manage all sorts of technology and situations around diabetes. But Tom says he wasn't always that interested in a diabetes deep dive. It all changed with his first CGM.
I'm quite good with numbers, analyzing numbers. So when I saw that line was the first time when I really became genuinely interested into how what I eat and what I do impact my blood sugar.
Tom was an accountant in his former life, so he really does love numbers. We'll talk about his diagnosis as a child, how much everything has changed since then, and why he started making videos about diabetes, basically experimenting on himself. This podcast is not intended as medical advice. If you have those kinds of questions, please contact your healthcare provider. Welcome to another week of the show. I am your host, Stacey Sims, and as always, I'm really glad to have you here. You know we aim to educate and inspire about diabetes with a focus on people who use insulin. And I have to be honest with you right now, as I'm recording this, I am a little overwhelmed. There is just a lot going on right now. I know everybody is busy, but this just seems to be one of those times where it's all kind of coming together at the same time for me. You know, the book came out last week, and thank you so much for the great response for that. I really appreciate it. I'm managing a couple of local events and then some more, regional events as well in the near future. Next week, I will be at an event in Florida called Macy's Believers, and I'll tell you about that a little bit later on. I'm doing some unexpected and happy travel, which is why I'm really scrambling as I record this episode, because we decided last minute to surprise my daughter for her birthday. So we're going to New Orleans, and I was not planning on making this trip. By the time you hear this, it will already have happened, and I'm sure everything went great, but I'm not like the most spontaneous traveler. So this means doing some things on a different schedule than I would have been this week, getting my brain around packing. I'm not a throw it in a backpack and jump on a plane kind of person. My husband is a lot more like that. So basically, I got a lot going on, but it's all good, and I'm very grateful for that. I did find this week's guest when I was looking for some specific information that I knew I would not find on an official manufacturer's website. Let's put it that way. We do talk about it a bit during the interview. I think most of us rely on community support, not just FDA-approved medical support, to manage day in and day out, whether you are a person with diabetes or, like me, a caregiver of somebody with diabetes. And of course, I hesitated when I said caregiver because I caregive a lot less for Benny than I did years ago. But my guest, Tom of Type 1 Talks, is a lot of fun on his channel, and he has really practical advice and help. Quick note, we talked just before he got the Dexcom G7 to try out. He is in Europe. He's also since been able to check out some other devices and systems. He was diagnosed as a small child in the former Czechoslovakia, and obviously at that time and in that place, didn't have access to much technology at all. So things really have changed for him. And I am so glad I got to speak to him. Great guy. And surprised me in a few ways that you will hear. But first, Diabetes Connections is brought to you by Afrezza. And when it comes right down to it, there hasn't been a lot of innovation for insulin. Sure, there are different brands, but nothing really unique when it comes to insulin delivery, except for Afrezza. Afrezza is unique because it is the only ultra-rapid-acting inhaled insulin available. It starts working quickly without the need for injections at mealtime. Once you breathe Afrezza into your lungs using the inhaler, insulin appears in your bloodstream in less than 1 minute, and it may start reducing blood sugar in about 12 minutes. Find out more and see if Afrezza is right for you. Go to diabetes-connections.com and click on the Afrezza logo. Afrezza can cause serious side effects, including sudden lung problems and low potassium, and is not for patients with chronic lung disease such as asthma or COPD, or for patients allergic to insulin. Tell your doctor if you ever smoked, have ever had kidney or liver problems, a history of lung cancer, or if you are pregnant or breastfeeding. Most common side effects are low blood sugar, cough, and sore throat. Severe low blood sugar can be fatal. Do not replace long-acting insulin with Afrezza. Afrezza is not for use to treat diabetic ketoacidosis. Please see full prescribing information, including boxed warning, medication guide, and instructions for use on afrezza.com/safety. Tom, thank you so much for joining me. I'm not sure I'm thrilled that we're doing video along with this, but I appreciate you making some time for me and my listeners.
You're most welcome, Stacey. I'm happy to be here. I follow you and love your podcast. So really happy to, and it's an honor for me to really be here and talking to you.
That's really nice of you to say. I appreciate it. And of course, I'm going to get into how I found you and why I really appreciate you and the help you've given a lot of people in the community, including me. But let me start by just asking you, what is your diagnosis story? How long have you lived with diabetes and how old were you?
Well, then we have to go all the way back to the 80s, I guess. So I don't really know anything else but living with type 1 diabetes because I was diagnosed at the age of 3. I was a really small kid. And so all the challenges, or most of the challenges at that early stage have to be dealt with by my parents, especially my mom. And I know I had the standard symptoms of type 1 diabetes. And one night I went to the bathroom to pee. I had to go to pee a lot during that time. I was drinking a lot. And I think my mom told me that she found out that, when she cleaned the floor, that it was very sticky. And so they started figuring out what that can be, and then somehow indicated there's probably too much sugar in my urine. And so that made them bring me to hospital and talk to the doctor. And I think the diagnosis was pretty much clear from the beginning. But I don't really remember a lot of it unless from what I heard from my mom, who, by the way, I don't want to get emotional, but I think she had to really do all the heavy lifting back then. And she went through all the challenges that went with the diagnosis.
Yeah.
So I really grateful that, the job she did back then, because it was 1988. And in that year, we lived, I was born in Czechoslovakia. In that year was still the era of communism. And, back then we did not have any technology. We didn't even have a glucometer. So you can imagine how challenging that must have been for her to take care of me basically 24/7 without actually knowing what my blood sugars are even back then.
Yeah. Well, I so appreciate you sharing so much this early in the interview too. I didn't mean to make you, it's interesting as a mom of a child with type 1 to hear that, because I think as parents, we always feel like our child, we would do anything to take it away from them. And every person with type 1 I've talked to who was diagnosed as a child has said, oh, my mother had it rougher than I did. Right. Or I'm so, the same kind of sentiment, like, how did she possibly do it? It's so interesting to me to hear that perspective. But my question about growing up that way, and it's not so much even Czechoslovakia, although I can't imagine, I talked to people who were young in the United States in the 80s. Meters were not common. I think most home meters came out in the late 80s, early 90s. How did you check? Was it like the chemistry set in the bathroom, like most people had, or did you have nothing?
So we checked at the very initial stage. We could only check, we had the test strips, but these were not for blood, but for urine. So as you probably know, the way it works, how the sugar or how the energy from anything you eat goes through your body. The sugar first go to your blood, and then it should be absorbed by the cells. I'm not a doctor, but I think that's somehow how it works, plus minus. And if there is too much sugar in your blood, which is often the case when you are type 1 diabetic, especially in the early stage, then it goes out through the urine. And so you get an indication from these test strips that your blood sugar might have been high sometime in the past. Depending on how often you go to the bathroom, you don't really know if it was 1 hour ago or 3 hours ago when the blood sugar was high, or maybe it is still high. So we had that kind of indication, but we did not really know the number. And I think once in a month or once in 2 months, we did something that was called, I think, big profile. It probably doesn't make sense in English, but that's what we call it in my language. And what that meant is that we did 10 finger sticks throughout the day, always before meal, after meal, and then some finger pricks also at night. And we collected all those blood samples into something like a little vial, and we brought all these to the laboratory next day. So 24 hours later, we got the numbers. And then my mom sat with the doctor, and the doctor looked at the numbers, and he said, okay, these were the numbers. He probably asked some more questions to find out what was the day, if it was a standard day or not. And based on that, he recommended, what the insulin dose should be and how many units I should take. Having said that, what was kind of necessary in that situation, because you have kind of like a blind map, you have some kind of directions, but as you know, and as I know, everybody who has type 1 knows, every day is different depending on what you do, what you eat, how you feel, and then other things. So we were trying to keep the days as similar as possible, not do something special on one day and then something completely different on another day, because otherwise it's very difficult to come up with the right dose of insulin and the right timing if every day is completely different. So I think my parents tried for me to have the days standardized as much as possible, and also the food and the activity that I had throughout the day, so that any kind of doctor, when they look at this big profile, at these 10 blood checks from one day out of those 30 days or 60 days, that it was pretty much similar to what it was on the other day, so that we can get some kind of relevant information from the doctor. Otherwise, as you can imagine, the advice from the doctor might be totally off if we took those samples on a day that's completely different to all the other days.
It's interesting to note that you have gone from basically maybe a 1 in 24 hour knowledge of where your blood sugar was, and even that 24 hours was probably for the previous day, to now explaining to people and showing really the up to the minute diabetes technology that is out there. How did you start Type 1 Talks? What happened to make you start that?
So what made me start that was really my first CGM. When I had my first continuous glucose monitor, which was the Freestyle Libre, it was really the first time when I could see the curve, or when I could see the line 24/7 for a few days in a row. And that really gave me much more information about my blood sugar levels compared to what I had with the glucometer. And because I'm an accountant by profession, I don't work in accounting anymore, but up until recently I did. I'm quite good with numbers, analyzing numbers. So when I saw that line, was the first time when I really became genuinely interested into how what I eat and what I do impact. And, that might sound surprising, because I now have a YouTube channel and I'm telling or showing other people how I do things. But, if we went 5 years ago or even 15 years ago, I was never a perfect diabetic. I was actually probably one of the worst on the map when it comes to taking care of myself, especially during my teenage year. I was a disaster. I can get into more details if you want. I'm not embarrassed to admit all the things that I have done, but I know
we'll
I
get
only
back
hurt
to the
myself.
teen years. We'll talk about that for sure. I'll bring you back.
But as I saw those numbers, as I saw those lines from the CGM, and started to really, with genuine interest, analyzing, what I've done on that day, what I ate for lunch, when I took my bolus, how long before lunch, I realized I can really keep the line almost flat when I really put a lot of efforts into it.
You do so many videos and you talk about so many things that are useful. I'm saying all this because I'm leading up to how I found you, which is the video about restarting the Dexcom G6. And it's one of these things where, yes, many people will know, if you've listened for a long time, Dexcom is a sponsor of this show, but they don't tell me what to say. I have no issue bringing this kind of stuff up. The community knows about it and uses it. And Tom, I've sent your video to a lot of people. How do you find things like that? I know that people in the community, we all, people talk and you find information, and then you may, show it, because you're very good at showing as the user how it works, what to do, different ways of not just restarting, different ways of using this technology to thrive with diabetes. So how do you find out, what are your sources? And then how do you translate that for the rest of us?
Yeah, so my main sources of information, especially at the early stage, was just following other content creators, and especially following people in different Facebook groups. Because if you're in my age or your age, we use Facebook quite a lot, or at least I don't do it that much anymore. But 5 years ago, I used Facebook almost on a daily basis, and there is really a group for everything.
Yeah.
I just learned everything from the communities. Very rarely that, or you probably know that it's not very likely that I have a specific question. I will go to Dexcom headquarters or Omnipod headquarters to ask, hey, how do I restart the sensor? You will have to go through probably some kind of department that gives very vague information to media. And to this specific question, they will definitely not give you the answer that you need if you are stuck somewhere in the middle of the desert and you really need to restart that last sensor that you have to have your blood sugars for the next 3 days until you get to wherever you have your other sensor, wherever you might have forgotten it or things like that. So that's where I find the information. I might have become popular for these restart videos, but that's really only very small portion of what I do. And I have over hundreds videos, and maybe one or two are devoted to this specific topic that might be useful, but it's something that's a little bit of an off-label solution that's not generally advisable or that I would recommend to someone who doesn't really need it.
Right. And you're very clear about that.
It's not in an emergency situation. It's more of an emergency situation kind of thing.
Yeah. And I should say you're very clear about that. This is not something that you are just saying, just do this because I said so. I am not a person with diabetes, so I don't do a lot of technology, how it works, tips and tricks. Also, because my son is the person who wears it, he would probably like to do that, but I'm not. He's a minor. He's still a kid. I'm not comfortable yet letting him do those kinds of things. When you're doing them, do you ever feel like you're experimenting on yourself? It's not all about restarts, as you said, but when you're recommending how to use technology, what to eat or exercising and things like that, you're kind of your own guinea pig.
Yes, I'm experimenting a lot, and I'm learning by mistakes. So not everything, not every device I try, I like, and then not every device will make it all the way to a video or every ad, because maybe it's not the best experience, or maybe I just don't feel good about it.
So you say, obviously you've worn multiple sensors in the past. And you've compared and things. Is there anything you can talk about in terms of the differences? I can just say from a very brief use of the Libre with my son, it seemed like it measured him slightly lower than the Dexcom, just on average. And that was just for us. But I kind of felt like I had to almost add 10 to 15 points to any reading. He was almost always lower with it, but a finger stick showed he was a little higher. So we just kind of got used to it and figured it out. Do you notice things like that? Can you kind of share some information about the different sensors that you've noticed?
Obviously, I can share what anecdotally happened for me or someone else.
Neither of us are medical professionals. This is information that is personal to us.
And then I think another thing I can share is general trends, what I hear from others in the community and what I read in the comment section. And when something comes up a lot, I would call it a general trend. Like you see, what you described with specifically Freestyle Libre and lower numbers. I read that from time to time. I see exactly the same comment. Libre is always showing a little bit less than what I get from the blood glucose meter. And that doesn't happen to me, right? I don't really have this specific problem with Libre. I've seen lower numbers, let's say, but more to the end of the sensor, not throughout the whole lifetime on my body. And I think I also mentioned that in one of my videos. One big problem that I have with Dexcom, and it's just me, it's not everyone, but I again see it maybe as a trend, is during the first few hours, 6, 8 hours, maybe 12 sometimes, the numbers I cannot use, basically. They are completely off, So I get readings below 50 for the first 6 hours, almost every time I get a new sensor. And I think Dexcom says, okay, the warm-up, I think the warm-up time is just, for me as an individual, it's not 2 hours. With the G6, it's just 6 or 8 hours. Because if I wait 6 or 8 hours, the numbers are always excellent all the way through, all the way until the end. Things like that, I would call general trends. It's again hard to compare which one is better or more accurate. You can look at look at the mean average relative difference, which is like a specific measure that's more scientific, and where they look at bigger groups of people during the clinical trials and say, okay, Freestyle Libre 3 now has 7.9, which is really good. But then Dexcom, I think Dexcom G6 had 9, which is also really good, right? So it's a little bit lower for Libre now, but both of these numbers are really excellent. I think, it's a great tool, and nobody really cares that much about 1% up or down. It's a nice game to play, or say, okay, this time this one is better, the other time the other one is better, and compare it that way. But in real life, you don't really see that 1%. So what I'm actually talking about in my videos, it doesn't matter. Both are really accurate. But those general trends you mentioned are there definitely. And yeah, with Dexcom G6, I like it. I use it now as my daily driver because it integrates with my insulin pump, because it's just better fits into my workflow. I can start automated insulin delivery on my insulin pump, and I can't do it with Libre, and that's for me a deal breaker. But if that was not the case, maybe I would not be using Dexcom because of this initial 6 hours that I never get the numbers right, and I know it. And sometimes I know we should not be extending, and I don't want to promote it. Sometimes I'm almost thinking, should I actually not extend the old sensor that I know is 100% accurate, then wait for the warm-up, because in my specific case it's a bit longer. And I know that I will not have the best numbers for the next 6-8 hours. Yeah, I should not extend, but I almost want to, if you know what I mean, because I know I can rely on it, and maybe get a new one in 2 or 3 days when I have more time to deal with it. Maybe I'm in a situation where I'm running for a meeting and I know I'm already late, and I just want to have the right number. I want my insulin pump to get that dose automatically. I don't want to be having to deal with changing the site and having to do the insulin dosing manually because I will not have the right number. So there are like pluses and minuses of both, and general trend that I'm observing. But overall, I think they are both great, and I haven't tried Eversense yet. I would like to, because it's the one that can be implanted in the arm. I'm sure that would be also an interesting one to compare, because it's slightly different. It's something that's inside, not on top of the arm. It lasts much longer, and it's a little bit different design and different technology. That's how I find it really interesting.
I wanted to ask you, when you have all those issues for the first 8 hours, 6 to 8 hours, which is pretty common, do you calibrate or do you leave it alone?
No, I don't calibrate usually. And I also say, from my experience, it's better not to calibrate, because I feel like the calibration will not help at that point. It will only throw it off more, because the system is calibrated perfectly from the factory. It just needs a little bit more time, in my case, to get going. The way I think about it, I don't have a 2-hour warm-up. I have an 8-hour warm-up for Dexcom. That's how I think about it. But I don't want to calibrate, because I know the calibration is always precise. If it's a new sensor, if I put in the right code from that sensor, not some other code, mess around with the code, then I know it will be accurate at some point.
Yeah.
For most people, it's after 2 hours when they get the first reading. For me, not always. But I don't calibrate. I will only calibrate when I see constantly, during the time when I'm stable, when my glucose is not going up or down dramatically, when I'm stable, pretty much flat, when I see I'm off by more than 15-20%, then I will calibrate to the finger prick. Yeah. But I don't check that often with my glucometer anymore, to be honest, since I have Dexcom. So I don't calibrate very often.
Yeah, my son, he does it all himself now, so I don't know, but I suspect he never calibrates, because we really never do with the G6, at least when we started it 4.5 years ago. I don't think maybe we've calibrated it 3 times in all of that time. And I can guarantee you my 17-year-old is finger sticking as little as humanly possible. I make him take a meter when he goes away for it overnight, but I probably should check it. It probably doesn't have any batteries or any strips.
Yeah, I would totally understand. It's just, again, remembering myself at that age.
Yeah, but he's
you
got a
could check
Dexcom,
as
so
many
it's
times as you want, but it would probably not really help.
Let's talk about that, if you don't mind, because here you are as somebody who is really on top of his diabetes management now. And you already mentioned a couple of times that as a teenager, you struggled. So that makes me feel really good because I think my son's doing really well, but he is 17 and he forgets and he doesn't want to always do stuff. And he, whatever, he's a teenager. Can you talk a little bit about your experience? Do you remember anything in particular that stands out?
Yes. So where do I start? So I'm 38 years old now. So I don't remember every detail of how I felt when I was 17 or 12 or 15. But I think when I was 12, 13, I think I was just pretty much doing my best to follow the instructions or information that we had at the time. I got my first insulin pump when I was 12. I think it was Disatronic, which is a Swiss insulin pump. I didn't like it at all, although it probably helped with my diabetes management. I just didn't like it because it was quite big. It was bulky. The infusion set was very long, and it was one of the first pumps really. That it was in 2000. Not even that. It was 1996 when I was 12 years old and I got that. So you can imagine that was not the kind of insulin pump we have today. And I think that's where it all started, with me going a little bit more rebellious with the doctors and with pretty much any kind of diabetes type authority. And I really wanted, I just wanted to be a normal kid when I was a teenager. I just acted very often, or almost the whole teenage years, I would say, like I acted like I don't have diabetes. I would do things like I would not take bolus, not only because I forgotten, but also because I just didn't take it. I didn't even think about why I didn't take it. I didn't. So then I felt bad, obviously, because my blood sugars went up. I was high, probably around 300-400 easily. And then I would feel bad. So I would just take some insulin, right? But not really checking my blood sugar, how much it is. Just get some insulin and then to get it down to feel okay, like physically. So that was quite normal. And then it's not normal, but that was my pretty much day to day.
I think it's very normal.
and I would do things like when we went to see my diabetologist, they would download the numbers from my glucometer. So I knew they would be downloading the numbers from the meter. So I would also like fake the numbers. I would just take 3-4 readings at a time and then write down one was in the morning, one was at noon, one was at dinner, things like that. And just like eating totally randomly sweets, candies, but like a lot, which obviously is not great when you don't take insulin for it as a type 1. I'm not telling anyone, you can't eat this and that, but the way you do it, there's the right way to do it and the wrong way to do it. And I was basically doing all the things that are the wrong ones. And I would also, and this probably is the top of the list of my, I don't even know how to call these instances, but my top of the list of my episodes that I'm not very proud of, but I ended up 3 times in emergency because of the ketoacidosis. So some alcohol was involved and I didn't eat, and my blood sugar was really high, and I drank too much alcohol and vomited and all this, I just ended up in ER in the hospital, and that happened 3 times, in my late teenage years. So something I'm definitely not proud of. And again, my parents have always supported me, although I've done all these things that I'm not really proud of, and that must have been embarrassing, for them to come to the hospital when ambulance took me to the hospital to see me and to talk to the doctors. I'm not ashamed of what I've done, but on the other hand, I think that with the technology we have today, someone who is in that age might be able to be that normal kid without, having to totally ignore the disease. And and just set up the automated insulin delivery if they have a pump with the CGM, if they can afford it and they can have it, and really be almost like someone who doesn't have to deal with all these things like pricking fingers, taking injections, stuff like that. But yeah, there were many episodes, and I think we don't need to go into detail. I already shared probably enough.
I'm so appreciative that you shared those. I'm just thrilled that you were so honest about it, because there is no such thing as a perfect diabetic. And there are so many stories like that, and it is real life. And I agree. I think the technology doesn't really keep people with diabetes. It doesn't help them be perfect, but I feel like with my son, it's got these guardrails now, right? To kind of help him stay safer, perhaps, with the automated systems. So fingers crossed, but I really appreciate you sharing that. Just before we wrap it up, I have 2 more questions for you. My first is, what do you enjoy the most with Type 1 Talks? Is it feedback from listeners? Is it just making the videos? Is it telling your story? Like, why do you keep doing it? What do you like about it?
So what I enjoy the most is the whole process of creating the video. I just really like to do it. And if you watch some of my videos, I kind of think about what it's going to be about and how it's going to flow from the beginning to the end, because I'm trying to really make it in the way so that it's easy to follow for someone who's never used a CGM before, and just putting the points together in some kind of story, how the video will happen. That I really like doing that. And then the actual editing of the video, I quite like doing. I learned how to edit in my late 30s, and I'm not a perfect editor, but I enjoy the process of editing the video. And obviously what I like the most, or what I enjoy the most, probably is selfishly, I would say the positive feedback from the community. So if someone writes in the comments, thank you, this really helped me, and describe like the situation, what specifically happened, why they needed to watch that video and how that helped them. That's this kind of thank you. It's probably the biggest reward for me, and where I see that content might have impacted someone in a positive way. And creating this Type 1 Talks face or brand or YouTube channel or whatever you want to call it also helped me to focus a little bit more on my health, and I could just free up some time. I don't really do accounting anymore. I don't work in accounting, and I could just focus on creating content for other diabetics and building a little business around that. So building that something that's my own and that can have positive impact on the diabetes community that I really enjoy.
One of the things I have loved about talking to you today is you are a fun, gregarious, outgoing personality on your videos. You look kind of like a tough guy, but you've really teared up a couple times. You've gotten emotional when you've talked about your family. Your mom, okay, you were diagnosed at age 3, these tough teen years. Look what you're doing now with diabetes. Does your mom watch your channel? Has she ever said to you, I can't believe this. Like, this kid that wouldn't listen to me about checking his blood sugar at age 12 is now doing so well and helping all these other people. I would be so proud.
Yes. So my mom, I know she watches my videos. I know she's proud, although she never really told me, but I know she is. She doesn't speak English, and she understands a little bit of English, but for her, I think she cannot 100% understand all the content, but I know that both of my parents follow me, and my mom follows me, and they support me. My mom reads through the comments because that's something she can put in the translator and really get 100% of the conversation. So yeah, I think she would be. She's proud, and I'm just tearing up because I guess that's my personality, and I'm not really a tough guy. In my videos, I might look tough, but I'm probably the exact opposite. And I'm also a little bit nervous just talking to you because I know how many people watch this. And when I record my videos, I just talk to a camera, and I'm imagining, someone else sitting there who is my friend, and I don't really get the impression of, how many people will be listening to it. And, all your previous guests who are really famous and doing really great job for the community might be listening to it. And I just don't see myself at that level. So that's why I'm a little bit nervous and maybe tearing up. Yeah. So well, I hope you don't mind.
I think it's wonderful. I got to tell you, Tom, I think what you're doing is just as important as any other guest I've had. I love your story. I think it's wonderful how open you've been. Your videos are so helpful and so clear. So do us a favor, because in the US, we're a little behind right now with G7 and Libre 3. Keep that stuff coming. Let us know what to expect, what you like about them and what you don't. And thank you so much for joining me and for being so open. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. I really enjoyed talking to you. And I just want to say hi to all your followers and wish everyone a great day or great evening or whatever it is where you are at.
Thank you so much, Tom.
You're listening to Diabetes Connections with Stacey Sims.
Much more about Tom, and I will link up to his channel as well over at diabetes-connections.com or in the show notes, wherever you are listening to this episode. Quick note about upcoming events, and I am doing something brand new to me, which makes me a little nervous. I'll talk about that in a moment. But first, Diabetes Connections is brought to you by Dexcom. And I get a lot of questions about Dexcom coverage for people on Medicare. And, it makes sense. It's not as though you stop needing a CGM the minute you turn 65. Well, the good news is that the Dexcom G6 continuous glucose monitoring system is covered for Medicare for patients who meet the coverage criteria. If you have either type 1 or type 2 diabetes and intensively manage insulin, you may be covered. To find out more about what that means and if you qualify, check out dexcom.com/G6-Medicare, and I will link that up in the show notes so you do not have to remember it. You're going to want to talk to your doctor. You may even be able to get your Dexcom supplies at the pharmacy, saving you time and money. Learn more at, again, dexcom.com/G6-Medicare. All right, so later this week, I am back on a plane. I'll be going to Florida. I don't remember the last time I did back-to-back weekends of travel like this. It was definitely well before COVID. I'm so excited to be back at the Macy's Believers event. This is a great gala. They have wonderful entertainment. It's a great family event, and they're raising money to send families to the Friends for Life event next July. I'm the MC this year, and I'm just thrilled that they asked me. They've added a daytime event as well, and I think they're raffling off a lunch with me, which is kind of fun. I don't know that I've ever been a raffle item before. So if you're there or you plan to be there, please come say hi, and I'll be sharing on social, of course. And I mentioned doing something I have never done before. I am taking part in a Twitter Spaces for Diabetes Chat. This is going to be happening the same day as Macy's Believers. It's a separate event. I'll just be at the Macy's Believers event when I'm doing the Twitter Space. That's kind of complicated. But Diabetes Chat meets every Monday on Twitter. They have a Twitter Space, with the audio on Twitter. And this is going to be something new for them, part of Diabetes Awareness Month. They're doing a 24-hour Twitter Space. From Saturday to Sunday. Of course, this is in the UK, so the timing is a little bit different, but I was very lucky and they were very accommodating, and they gave me a midday time on Saturday. So I'll be sharing much more about that on social media in the week to come, but I hope you can join me, and I hope you do check out if you are on Twitter, and things are weird over there right now. But if you're on Twitter, this kind of stuff is really the best thing about it. So right now, unless things really do change a lot over there, follow Diabetes Chat. That is diabetes_chat. Or if you follow me, I will be talking about it and posting some information in the week to come. All right. Thank you so much to my editor, John Buchanan from Audio Editing Solutions. Thank you so much for listening. I'm Stacey Sims. I'll see you back here in a few days. Until then, be kind to yourself.
Diabetes Connections is a production of Stacey Sims Media. All rights reserved, all wrongs avenged.